B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Eirovin Daf Tezayin. We're going to start 2 lines from the bottom of Tezvav Omud Beis. Says the Gemara, and just we'll get back into the sugya. We learnt in the Mishnah on Tezvav Omud Beis, Shayoro shechonso bebika. If you had a caravan that camped out in an open field, and an open field typically would have the status of a Carmelis, what do they have to do in order to turn the area into Rishus HaYochid so that they can carry and do whatever they need to do during Shabbos? So the Mishnah told us what they can do. Says the Gemara, in the Brayse Toshima, Shayoro shechonso bebikar, a caravan that camped in an open field, v'hikifua, and they surrounded the area, b'gmalin, with camels, ba'ukfois, with saddles, ba'avitin, with saddle cushions, b'shlifin, with bundles, b'konim, with reeds, b'koilchois, with stalks, vegetable stalks. Then, since, bottom line, they managed to encircle the entire area with whatever it was, metaltalin b'soicha, they can carry inside this area. Providing that the gap between one camel and the next is not the length of a gomel, of a camel, and between one saddle and the next, there isn't a gap, the space of a saddle, and between one cushion and the next, that there should not be a gap between one cushion and the next, the size of a cushion. So what do you see from here? That if it was exactly 50-50, then it would be a problem. It would not be a good bechitza, because it says there mustn't be bein ukuf le'ukuf k'maloi ukuf, or bein gomel le'gomel k'maloi gomel. And we saw before in the Gemara that porutz ka'oimed, where you have 50% which is oimed, which is solid, which is standing, and 50% which is porutz, which is a gap, which is open. It was a machlekas in the Gemara. According to Rav Papa, it's mutter. According to Rav Huna B'rei Rav Yeshua, it's a problem. Here we have an explicit brisa that tells us that it's a problem. How is Rav Papa going to answer that? Answers the Gemara, when it says that you mustn't have the gap between one saddle and the next, just for argument's sake, the size of a saddle, it means that the gap in between the two saddles was wide enough that a saddle could very easily go in and out, which means that it was a fraction larger than a saddle. In that case, the porutz, the gaps, are going to be that little bit wider than the parts that were not gaps, and therefore if it's porutz maruba aloimed, everyone agrees will be a problem. But in the event that you have bein gomol legomol k'maloi gomol exactly, it means it's exactly as much gaps as they are not gaps, then it would be okay according to Rav Papa. Continues the Gemara. Toshma, we're going to bring another brisa. And it's very important to remember, and Rashi points it out here, probably for this reason, that we're talking here about kilaim. And we've already mentioned previously, one of the halachas of kilaim, if you have a vineyard growing on one side of a wall, then normally you're not allowed to plant certain vegetation, certain crops right next to a vine. However, if there's a wall between the vine and these crops, then you're allowed to, right beyond the wall, you can plant whatever you want to plant. There's no halachas of kilaim. The question is, what's considered a wall? What's considered a good mechitza, a good partition? Let's see the brisa. Toshima. Nimtzes atoimer sholoish midois b'mechitzos. There are 3 categories of mechitzos. And now this brisa is going to be a little bit of a longer brisa, and we mustn't get confused. The brisa is going to split up all different types of partitions, mechitzos. The defining factor, the determining factor between one type and the next is how wide is the oimed part. And according to how wide the oimed is, the part that's standing, the part that's solid, and according to that we'll know how wide the gaps are allowed to be, and accordingly the different types of gaps, what will be the halachas of the entire area on the other side of this wall, of this mechitza. Says the Bryce as follows. The sholish midis b'mechitzos, there are three categories. The first category is as follows. Kol shehu pochis mishloisha. If the wall is made of slats, of reeds, of parts, it doesn't matter what they are, but they are less than 3 tfachim wide, then tzorich shelo yehei bein zeh lezeh shloisha. There mustn't be 3 tfachim between one piece and the next. Kedei shelo yizdakir hagdi b'vas roish. What is 3 tfachim? 3 tfachim is the gap needed for a kid, for a gdi, to be able to easily head first go straight through it. It's not going to be any difficult or effort for the animal to go through it. If it's 3 tfachim wide, then a gdi can easily go through, and then this mechitza will not be called a mechitza. And we're talking about that the pieces themselves are less than 3 tfachim. Now it doesn't say here how wide the solid part is. It could be anything between a mashu, a fraction, a few millimeters, and 3 tfachim, not including 3 tfachim. So if you have a reed of half a tefach, and then you have a gap of 2.5 tfachim, the gap is much, much larger than the oimed. The porot is much more than the oimed. Nonetheless, in this group, the only determining factor is there less than 3 tfachim between the pieces? If there's less than 3 tfachim, a gedi cannot go through it, then it's called lovud. What lovud does, halacha l'moshe misinai, is, so to speak, a virtual form of extension, and it's as if the whole area is solid, as if the gaps are full. And therefore, it doesn't matter if the gaps are wider than the solids or not, because either way we fill it up using lovud. And this is true only in this category. In this category where you've got very small pieces of oimed, or even if you have very small pieces, of very narrow pieces of oimed, nonetheless it can make up a wall on condition that the gaps are using lovud. That's this first bracket, this first category. The second category, kol shehu gimel. If the wall part is exactly 3 tfachim, umegimel adalad, or anything more than 3 but less than 4, tzorich shelo yehei bein zeh lezeh kamiluoi. Then if providing that you haven't got gaps that are the same as the boards, as the solid part, if the gaps are not the same, that means the gaps are less than the oimed. If the porot is less than the oimed, then it's a good mechitza, because you've got oimed meruba ala porots. Kedei shelo yehei porots ka-oimed. And let's just stress from here, the Gemara is going to do it soon, that from here we can deduce somewhat, and it's almost explicit, that if it would be exactly 50-50, it would be porot ka-oimed, it would be a problem. This seems to be following Reb Huna, who says that porot ka-oimed is a problem. But we'll soon see. V'im hoya porot meruba ala oimed. Here we seem to be having a contradictory statement. If the porot is more than the oimed, then what happens? Af keneged ha-oimed osur. If you have walls that every piece of solid, every oimed is up to 4 tfachim, but not 4 tfachim, in that case, if it's porot meruba me-oimed, or porot ka-oimed according to Rav Huna, then the whole area is considered as breached. It's as if there are no walls here whatsoever. Af keneged ha-oimed osur. Then even if you've got a vine growing on one side of the solid piece, then you're not even allowed to plant anything on the other side of the solid piece. If you have a piece of board 3.5 tfachim wide, and then you have a gap of 4 tfachim, or 3 3/4 tfachim, porot meruba la oimed, we totally disregard even the board of 3.5 tfachim, and you're not allowed to plant anything even on the other side of this board. That was the second category. The second category, where the determining factor of whether we consider this wall as existing or not is porot meruba la oimed, or porot ka-oimed, we'll soon see, or not. The third bracket, kol shehu daled, any mechitza where the oimed is 4 tvachim wide, each piece of oimed is 4 tvachim wide, u'me'arba ad 10 amos, or anything from 4 tvachim till 10 amos, including 10 amos, then what? Then tzarich shelo yehei bein zeh lezeh kamiluoi, shelo yehei porotz ka'omed. Here again, we have to make sure it's not porotz ka'omed. V'im hoya porotz ka'omed, if it was porotz ka'omed, which means if you don't have more oimed than porotz, then as follows: Keneged ha'oimed muta, keneged ha'porotz osur. Here, this is what's different in this category than the one before. That the one before, that the oimed part is less than 4 tvachim, the less than 4 tvachim is an insignificant area, and therefore, therefore, if we consider the whole area as not being circled because it's porotz meruba me'oimed, then we totally disregard even the parts that are standing. However, if it's more than 4 tvachim and more, since 4 tvachim is significant in its own right, therefore, even if we have to disregard the mechitzos as, that means we cannot consider them as totally encircling the area, because relative to the entire area it's porotz meruba oimed, but since the oimed themselves are 4 tvachim and more, they are significant, and therefore if you have a vine on one side of the oimed, you can plant anything on the other side of the oimed. However, and this is now true across the board, all three categories. Any area where the oimed is more than the porotz, af keneged porotz muter, it's considered totally closed. The pirutzos are merely considered as doorways, as psachim, not breaches, and therefore, even if you have a vine on one side of where the openings are, you're allowed to plant anything on the other side of these openings, of the gaps. Another halacha, which applies across the board, nifratza b'yosa me'eser, if the opening is more than 10 amos wide, then osir, it's not called a pesach, and the whole area is considered as not encircled. Obviously, keneged da'omed will be okay, but shaloi keneged da'omed, that will not work. That means even if you have oimed meruba ala porotz, but if any one piritza is more than 4 amos wide, more than 10 amos wide, if it's more than 10 amos wide, it's not called a pesach, it's called a piritza, and we cannot rely on the mechitzas. Another halacha, which is true across the board, and it's a halacha of tzuras haPesach that we've already learnt about. Hoyu sham konim hadoikronim. If you have reeds or some pieces of wood with a point that were knocked into the ground, and you braid a crossbar going across the tops of all these konim, and then you've got 2 uprights and a crossbar, that constitutes a tzuras haPesach, afilu b'yosa me'eser mutar. Even if they are more than 10 amos wide, since there's a tzuras haPesach, in hilchas kilayim, it's considered a good mechitza, and if there's a vineyard growing on one side of this Pesach, you can plant anything on the other side of this Pesach. This is the end of the brisa. Now the Gemara is saying, what do we deduce from here? Ktonim mias reisha. What did we see towards the beginning of the brisa? Migimel va'ad daled, that from 3 tvachim, that was the second category, was from 3 tvachim until 4 tvachim, excluding 4 tvachim. That was the first time where we saw that you mustn't have gaps that are the same width as the oimed, and we saw there which means there's got to be more oimed than porotz. And it would seem from there that if it's exactly porotz ka oimed, it would be a problem. Tiyuf to Rav Papa, as we pointed out before, that very first line in the second category is teaching us, it seems to be teaching us, that porotz ka oimed is asur, like Rav Huna, not like Rav Papa. Answers the Gemara, Omar l'chor Rav Papa, Mai miluoi nichnas v'yotza. When it says there that if the oimed is from 3 tvachim including 3 tvachim, up to 4 tvachim, excluding 4 tvachim, that second category, it says there that when is it kosher if you haven't got a gap which is like the oimed, the same width as the oimed. What it means is that the gap is not such that the oimed part could very easily fit into the gap, which means that the gap is a fraction wider than the oimed, because if it was exactly the same, it wouldn't easily be nichnas v'yotze, it would be a wedge. And the fact that it's nichnas v'yotze means that the gap is that drop wider. And that's what, according to Rav Papa, that's what the brisa means. If the gap is wide enough that the oimed, the width of the oimed could go in there easily, then it's a problem, because there it's going to be porotz meruba al oimed. However, if it's porotz ka oimed exactly, then it will still be a good mechitza, according to Rav Papa. Hochanami mistabra. And we're going to prove this from the next line in the brisa. What does it say in the brisa? Midiktoni, im hoya porotz meruba al oimed. The brisa continued and said that if the porotz is more than the oimed, then af keneged oimed osor. In the middle category, where the oimed is not 4 tvachim wide, if porotz meruba al oimed means that the whole mechitza is as if it's not a mechitza and you cannot even plant keneged oimed, when is that? When it's porotz meruba al oimed. It says explicitly that it's only a problem if there's more porotz than oimed, but if it's 50-50, it's okay. Like Rav Papa, ha ka oimed, if it's exactly the same, mutter, shma mino. So not only is it not a question from that first line, we even have proof to Rav Papa from the second line, that the determining factor, what makes this mechitzas possible, is not porotz ka'oimed, it's porotz meruba al oimed. Leimer to huf to the Rav Huna b'red Rav Yeshua. You're right. Now that the brisa says explicitly the porotz meruba al oimed, it's all osa, which seems from there that porotz ka'oimed is mutter. That's actually a question on Rav Huna that says porotz ka'oimed is osur. Omar lachot. You know what Rav Huna is going to answer you? Keep reading the brisa. You're going to get stuck as well. Ulatamech. You want to learn the brisa that it's fitting with Rav Papa, that porotz ka'oimed is mutter, and you brought me proof from the words in porotz meruba al oimed osur. It's only if the porotz is more than the oimed it's osur, but if it's 50-50 it's okay. Eima seifa. Keep moving down the brisa. What does it say in the brisa? Im hoya oimed meruba ala porutz, af keneged a porutz, mutter. We saw that in the halachas at the end of the brisa, those halachas that were not unique to any one category, we saw that there were first 3 categories, and then we had another 3 halachas that were across the board, all categories. The first one was im hoya oimed meruba ala porutz, af keneged a porutz, mutter. That when you have oimed meruba ala porutz, yet the gaps are less than the part that's not gaps, then the whole mechitza is a kosher mechitza, even parallel to the gaps. And there it says explicitly, im hoya oimed meruba ala porutz. When is it okay? Only if there's more oimed than porutz. If it's 50-50, it seems it's not okay. Well, that seems to be conforming with Rav Huna. Ha porutz ka oimed, ha ka porutz. If the oimed is ka porutz, also. So sefer kashil Rav Papa. The words of the brisa at the end, that it's only okay when it's oimed meruba ala porutz, is a question on Rav Papa who says oimed ka porutz is also okay. Reisha, and the Reisha where it says that in hoya porutz meruba ala oimed is not okay, but porutz ka oimed is okay. Kashil Rav Huna b'red Rav Yeshua. See, either way we have a contradiction in the brisa. The first part of the brisa is conforming with Rav Papa, the second part of the brisa is conforming with Rav Huna. And how does that work? Answers the Gemara, Sefer Rav Papa lo ikashya. The fact that in the Sefer it says that when it's oimed meruba ala porutz, everyone says it's okay, and the mechitzas are good mechitzas, it's true that those words, that oimed meruba ala porutz is okay, would seem to say that if it's 50-50 it's not okay. But no. Idi de tona reisha porutz meruba ala oimed, tona sefer oimed meruba ala porutz. According to Rav Papa, the beginning of the brisa had to say porutz meruba ala oimed is not okay, to tell us that porutz ka oimed is okay. That's the opinion of Rav Papa. Once it tells us in the Bryce at the beginning, the formula used at the beginning is that porutz meruba me'oimed is not okay. So in order to have a similar type of formula, similar type of terminology, it says at the end of the Bryce that if it's oimed meruba ala porutz, it is okay. But in actual fact, even if it's oimed ka porutz, it's also okay. We can also answer the beginning of the Bryce, it should conform with Rav Huna. How? According to Rav Huna, in the Sefer it had to say that when is it okay? Only when it's oimed meruba ala porutz, because according to Rav Huna, oimed ka porutz is not okay. Since in the Sefer it had to say oimed meruba ala porutz is okay, we want to conform with that terminology, and therefore in the Reisha it says that if porutz is meruba me'oimed, it's not okay. Even though, according to Rav Huna, even if it's porutz ka'oimed, it's also not okay. And therefore, Tana Reisha porutz meruba la'oimed. Continues the Gemara. And just before we read the Gemara inside, we'll notice that the three categories in the Brisa were split up as follows. You've got from mashahu wide oimed until just less than 3. And there the whole discussion is lovud. Because if you've got a reed which is an inch wide, even if you have a gap of 2.5 tfachim, it's still okay. Because you have lovud. A gedi can't walk through, so it's called lovud. If you have lovud, it's called closed. If it's exactly the same, it doesn't matter. The porutz ka'omed and porutz not ka'omed is not relevant here. It's you have lovud, then it's kosher. If you don't have lovud, which means the gaps are more than 3 tvachim, then you're going to have a problem with porutz meruba la'omed or omed meruba la porutz. But the first category is there to teach us that lovud works irrespective of the piritza. Even if the piritza is much, much wider than the omed, you have lovud. The second bracket was there not to teach us hilchas lovud, was there to teach us porutz meruba la'omed or omed meruba la porutz, and to tell us but only till 4 tvachim, not including 4 tvachim, because from 4 tvachim and on we have an extra element that since itself the 4 tvachim is significant, even if we have to disregard the mechitza as a full mechitza, at least where the oimed is, it's considered a wall and you can plant on the other side of it. That was the third category. And then we learned about how wide the piritzis can be. The question is, if the oimed is exactly 3 tvachim. What did we see in the first bracket? What's called lovud if it's just under 3 tvachim? 3 tvachim is already not lovud because the gedi can go through. So what did we say in the first bracket? From a mashahu width oimed till 3, just under 3 tvachim. If you have less than 3 tvachim gap, it's okay. You have lovud. If you have 3 tvachim gap, you don't have lovud. You don't have lovud, the mechitza is going to be possible because it's going to be porutz meruba la'omed. Now the question is, if you have exactly 3, what's the halacha there? Is it not also true that if you have a gap of less than 3, it's going to be okay, and if you have a gap of 3, it's not going to be okay? I mean, it's the same halacha as in the first category. What was the halacha in the first bracket? In the first category, if the gaps are less than 3 tvachim, it's okay. If it's 3 tvachim, it's not okay. Because less than 3 tvachim is lovud, 3 tvachim is not lovud. If the oimed is exactly 3 tvachim, then, and you have a gap of less than 3 tvachim, it's oimed meruba la porutz, it's okay. If you have an oimed of 3 tvachim and a gap of exactly 3 tvachim, it's oimed ka porutz. According to Rav Huna, what's the halacha of oimed ka porutz? It's aser. So the halacha of the first category applies, according to Rav Huna, to an oimed which is exactly 3 tvachim. According to Rav Papa, it wouldn't apply. Because according to Rav Papa, if the oimed is exactly 3 tvachim, and the gap is 3 tvachim, it would still be okay. It would be oimed kaporutz. And then that wouldn't belong to the first category, because the first category says that if the gap is 3 tvachim, it's not okay. But according to Rav Huna, who says oimed kaporutz is not okay, we have a bit of a question. Why is the first category talking about until 3 tvachim, excluding 3 tvachim? 3 tvachim oimed is already the second category. Why is 3 Tvachim exactly 3 Tvachim not in the first category? That's what the Gemara is going to ask now. Asks the Gemara, Bishlei Miller of Papa, Mishum Hachalei Oriv Lahu, we didn't combine V'Tanya Lahu, and we didn't combine the first and the second. That means we didn't combine the 3 Tvachim, exactly Oimei 3 Tvachim, with the first group. Elul Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua, according to Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua, who says that Porutz Ka'oimed is Asa, L'Irvinu V'Lisninu. Why don't we put the 3 Tvachim Oimed with the first category and read as follows? Kol Shehu Pochis Mishloisha. Anything that's less than 3 Tvachim Oimed. V'Shloisha, or if it's 3 Tvachim exactly. Tzorich Shelo Yehei Ben Zeh Lezeh Shloisha. It must be that the gap is less than 3 Tvachim. If the gap is less than 3 Tvachim, you have Lovud, it's okay. If the gap is 3 Tvachim, it's not okay. If the Oimid is less than 3 Tvachim and the gap is 3 Tvachim, it's not okay because it's Porot Merubah Oimid. And if the Oimid is exactly 3 Tvachim and the gap is 3 Tvachim, it's Porot Ka'oimed. And again, it's not okay according to Rav Huna. Put them in the same category. Says the Gemara, no. Mishum deloi domi psula d'reisha lepsula d'seifa. You're right that halachically speaking, the halacha of the first bracket, that it's dependent on less than 3 Tvachim and 3 Tvachim gap, would apply according to Rav Huna to 3 Tvachim oimed as well. But for a different reason. The first bracket, the concept that the first bracket is busy with is it lovud, is it not lovud? And there, everybody agrees that Lovud is only till 3 Tvachim, not including 3 Tvachim. And therefore, all the while that the whole discussion is Lovud, then we must be talking about an Oimed, which is less than 3 Tvachim, and that's the discussion. Once you have the Oimed being 3 Tvachim, and the gap being a full 3 Tvachim, then the reason that that's not okay according to Rav Huna is not because of the rules of Lovud, but because of the rules of Porutz Ka'oimed. The rules of Porutz Ka'oimed, Porutz Merubah Me'oimed, Oimed Merubah Me'porutz, that's already a discussion for the second category. It means that halacha, it's true what we said, but the second category is discussing the halachas of what's more, Oimed or Porutz, or are they equal? In the first bracket, all we're discussing is Lovud. And therefore, even according to Rav Huna, the exact 3 Tvachim Oimed does not belong to the first bracket. Does Psula Doreisha Kadesh Lo Yizdakir Agadi B'Vas Achas. The whole discussion in the first bracket is only, is it Lovud, is it not Lovud? The determining factors, is it 3 Tvachim wide? Can a Gedi, a kid, easily walk through it? Psula de Seifa. The second case, the second bracket in the Bryce, so that's discussing Shelo Yehei Porutz Ka'oimed, and that's where it belongs according to Rav Huna. Continues the Gemara. Pochois Mishloisha Mani. In the Bryce we saw, in the first bracket, we saw that if there's less than 3 Tvachim, it's Lovud. It's a virtual type of extension of the Oimed, and it's considered as if it's not a gap. Mani. Who says that 3 Tvachim is not considered, is up to 3 Tvachim is Lovud, 3 Tvachim is not Lovud? Rabbanon. We know it's a machlokas, the Rabbanon and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, is Lovud 3 Tvachim, or is Lovud 4 Tvachim. Here, when we're talking about 3 Tvachim, the Bryce is obviously following the Chachomim. The Amrinon, Pochos Mishloisha Amrinon Lovud. Shloisha lo Amrinon Lovud. The Chachomim say up to 3 Tvachim is Lovud, more than 3 Tvachim and more is not Lovud. A Maseifa. Let's move down to the Brisa. Kol shehu shloisha umishloisha va'ad arba. In the second bracket, we say that anything that's up to 4 Tvachim, not including 4 Tvachim, it's a bracket of its own. What's unique about that category is that if the mechitza is not a good mechitza because it's porutz merubah la'oimed, or according to Rav Huna, porutz ka'oimed, then even keneged ha'oimed we disregard altogether. Which means that what's called a significant mechitza, 4 Tvachim. 4 Tvachim is called significant. Also on Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That seems to be following Reb Shimon ben Gamliel that says that 4 Tvachim is significant, and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel therefore says that up to 4 Tvachim is Lovud. The Omar, Pochis mi'arba or Lovud, because Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says that Lovud, the significant measurement that you no longer say Lovud, is 4 Tvachim. Di Rabbanon mishloisha v'ad arba Shloisha v'arba chadhu. According to the Rabbanon, who say that 3 tvachim is already significant and you no longer say lavud, then 3 tvachim should be significant for all the halachas here. And it should belong to the third bracket, that 3 tvachim of oimed, in the same way as 3 tvachim is too wide to say lavud, 3 tvachim is wide enough to be significant that keneged ha'oimed, even if we disregard the rest of the wall, at least opposite or parallel to the oimed of 3 tvachim, it should be mutter to plant kilayim there, because 3 tvachim is significant. Omar Abaye. So we're going to have 2 answers here. Abaye says, Midareisha Rabbanon Sefer Nami Rabbanon. Everybody agrees, according to Abaye, the whole brisa, not everybody, the whole brisa agrees, Lovod is 3 tvachim, we're following the Chachomim. Umoide Rabbanon, the kol lemishra kenegdoi, yeika mokim arba choshev, v'iloi loi choshev. Abaye says, you compared 2 things when you asked your question, but they're not similar. One thing is it lovud, is it not lovud? Is this considered a mechitza or not? The determining factor being, can a gedi walk through? Less than 3 tvachim, a gedi cannot walk through, it's called an extension. More than 3 tvachim and more, a gedi can walk through, it's not called an extension of the oimed, it's called a gap. But in order for the oimed to be significant enough that it's called a mechitza on its own right, that if you have a kerem, a vineyard on one side, that you can plant anything on the other side, there you need something much more significant than just the fact that a gedi can walk through. And there even the Chachomim agree, you need 4 tvachim, which is already a significant shir. That's how Abaye explained the brisa. Rava Omar, Rava said no. The truth is the whole brisa could be following Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That in truth, real significance is 4 tvachim. And that's why from 4 tvachim you can plant keneged oimed, it's a significant oimed. Why then in the beginning do we say that when it comes to lavud, it's 3 tvachim? We know Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says lavud is 4 tvachim. Rava Omar mid the Sefer Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Reisha Nami Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. V'chi Omar Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, Omrinon Lavud, Hanamila Lemaila. When does Reb Shimon ben Gamliel say that up to 4 tvachim? Only 4 tvachim is called significant, and therefore up to 4 tvachim you say Lavud. When is that? When it's high up. We've seen this concept already before. Avalamata, but if it's on the ground, according to the Chachomim, the amount that a gedi, if a kid can walk through, that determines lavud. That's what the halacha Moshe Messinai was, and therefore that's what's called significance as far as these halachas are. According to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, he says significant gap, even gaps where we want to use lavud, up to 4 tvachim is an insignificant gap, and you do say lavud. But there's another condition. If a gedi can walk through, and there Reb Shimon ben Gamliel agrees that a gedi can walk through from 3 tvachim. If a gedi can walk through, then the very fact that a gedi can walk through already takes away the title, the status of mechitza. Because you can't have a mechitza that animals can walk straight through. That's not called a partition. So when the lavud we're trying to use is on the ground, where kids can go through, there even Reb Shimon ben Gamliel will agree that in spite of the fact that normally lavud is till 4 tvachim, if the kids can go through, we don't say lavud, and the mechitza is not considered a good mechitza. And therefore the beginning of the brisa here, where we're talking about lavud, is up to 3 tvachim, even according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. When talking about what's called significance that you can plant on the other side of the wall, there it's 4 tvachim. Because the brisa is Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, so explains Rava. Continues the Gemara Toshima. Defanois halolu, and we've seen this already on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Defanois halolu, if you have walls which are supposed to comprise a mechitza, sherubon psochim, most of the circumference of the area is doors, v'chaloinos or windows, which means it's poruts, mutter. Nonetheless, you're allowed to carry inside the area enclosed by these walls. But on condition that there's more oimed than poruts. The Gemara says that it doesn't make sense. You can't even read that. First you say rubon psochim v'chaloinos, that most of the circumference, most of the parameter is Pesach, is open, is psochim, is porutz, and then you say it needs to be oimed meruba. How do you read that? Sherubon sol kadaitach, most of the circumference is psachim. That's not oimed meruba. Elo sheriba behen psachim v'chaloinois mutter. The way you have to read it is that if you have a doif in a wall, that you made a lot, not that most of it is psachim and chaloines, not you put into it a lot of psachim and chaloines, mutter, when, on what condition are you allowed to carry inside the area? On condition that the oimed is meruba ala porutz. There's less gap than oimed. So what do we see from there? Ha kaporutz osur. If it was exactly 50-50, it would be osur. Tiyufta de Rav Papa. Here's another question on Rav Papa. Rav Papa said that porutz ka'oimed is mutter. And here you see that it's only mutter if it's oimed meruba ala porutz. Tiyufta. We don't have an answer for that. There's no way to answer Rav Papa. V'hilchasa kavasei Rav Papa, and the halacha is like Rav Papa. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand. Tiyufta v'hilchasa? On the same line, first you say that we have an unanswerable question. You refuted Rav Papa from a brisa, and then the second later you say the halacha is like Rav Papa. Says the Gemara yes, we don't have a problem with that. Mishum d'daika masnisin kavosei. We have a Mishnah that seems to be saying like Rav Papa says. What does it say in the Mishnah? Ditnan lo yiu pirtzois yaseires alabinyan. The problem is always going to be if you have a mechitza where the pirtza, the gaps, are more than the built-up part, then it's a problem. So you see in the Mishnah, ha kabinyan, if it's exactly 50-50, mutter, it's going to be mutter. So you see from the Mishnah, like Rav Papa, that porutz ka'oimed is called a good mechitza, it's mutter. So even though we have a good question without an answer from a brisa, we have a Mishnah that's following this opinion, and that's the halacha. Continues the next Mishnah. Makifin shloisho chavolim zu ze lemailo mizeh v'ze lemailo mizeh. We're talking here about a mechitza, and every mechitza, a solid mechitza is solid. If it's not solid, it can either be made of uprights, called shesi, reeds, or anything else, like we saw before, saddles, or whatever it may be, upright posts, and in between one upright and the next, there's a gap, and then we have to make sure, is it lovud, is there not lovud, is it porutz meruba lo oimed, are the gaps too wide, more than 10 amas, is there tzuras ha-pesach, etc. But that's called oimed, making a mechitza of only oimdim. And it's called a mechitza gerua. It's not such a good mechitza. An ideal mechitza is either a solid mechitza or shesi ve'erev. Shesi uprights, ve'erev are the horizontal bars. If you have a crisscross of shesi ve'erev, and the gaps between every shesi and every erev is less than 3 tvachim, and we use lovud, so to speak, to solidify the whole thing, that's good mechitza. But if you're only using shesi or only using erev, then it's a little bit more complicated. It's not such a good wall, and there's going to be certain cases where we're not going to rely on it because it's not such a good wall. Here we're going to discuss a wall not of shesi, of uprights, but of erev. How do you make a wall just of horizontal bars? Yeah, if you have strings, if you put strings up, and a string could be a millimeter, could be a fraction wide. But how do you make a wall just with strings? So the most ideal would be every 2 tvachim or every less than 3 tvachim, put up a string, make sure the top string is 10 tvachim or above, and then you have a wall of 10 tvachim using lovud. Lovud in and of its own doesn't need to have shesi ve'erev. Even if you have one string and another string below it, as long as you don't have 3 tvachim in between them, you can use lovud. So the Mishnah explains, Makifin, you can encircle the entire area you want to turn into Rishus HaYochid, Shloisho Chavolim, with 3 strings. Zeh l'mayla mizeh, one above the other, all horizontal. V'zeh l'mayla mizeh. Ubilvat shelo yehu bein chevel lechaver shloisha tvachim. But make sure you do not have 3 tvachim between one string and the next. Shiur Chavolim v'oivyon, Yeser al tefach, so the Mishnah is adding on, if you want to get to 10 tvachim with only 3 strings, if you want to use 4 strings, you don't have a problem at all. You put in, you make, let's say 2 3/4 tvachim off the ground, you put a string, and then another 2 3/4 tvachim, and then a string, and another 2 3/4 tvachim, and then a string, and another 2 3/4 tvachim, and a string, you'll get to your 10 tvachim using lovud. But the Mishnah is talking about 3 chavolim. If you have 3 chavolim, how are you ever going to get to 10 tvachim? So that's why the Mishnah says it has to be that the sum total of the width of these strings is going to be a tefach and 3 mashals. Why? Mashal is a fraction, and that mashal is how much less than 3 tvachim is lavud. So if you have just under 3 tvachim gap, and then you have 1 chevel, just under 3 tvachim gap, and another chevel, just under 3 tvachim gap, and another chevel, another rope, what have you got here? You've got 9 tvachim less 3 mashals where the top string is off the ground. That's not enough for mechitza, you need 10 tvachim. So it must be that the ropes, the strings that we're using, all together comprise a width of a tefach plus 3 mashals, and providing the gap is a mashal less than 3 tvachim, the top of the top rope will hit 10 tvachim, and that's a good mechitza. Another halacha, and now we're talking about shesi, a mechitza of only uprights, makifin bekonim. You can encircle an area with just reeds, upright, or make sure that between one reed and the next you don't have 3 tvachim. If you have 3 tvachim, you won't have lovud. You're going to have a problem that the reeds are very narrow, the gaps are more than 3 tvachim, and therefore you'll have porot merubah oimid, and it's going to be possible. Now the Gemara is saying another point. B'shayora dibru. And it seems that what the Mishnah means is that the fact that we allow you to use just oriv, or just shesi, just uprights, or just horizontal strings, is only when a rabbim need it. When a lot of people need it, 3 or more people need it, it's called a shayora, it's a caravan of people, it's a group of people need it, the chachomim will mekel. Divi Rabbi Yehuda, that was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was that you're only allowed to use such a type of mechitza of either shesi or erev, only if it's for a shayora. The Chachamim argued Rabbi Yehuda and say lo dibru b'shayora elo b'hoive, because this Mishnah is really a continuation of the previous Mishnah. The Mishnah on Daf Tezvav Amud Beis was talking about what can a caravan shayora shechonzo bebika, a caravan that camped out in an open field, what can they do to create a rishus hayachid? So Rabbi Yehuda understood that this Mishnah is a direct continuation from there, and you're only allowed to use such a type of wall if it's for a shayora, not for an individual. The Chachamim say no, we were talking about a shayora, we're talking about a caravan of people just because they are typically those who on the way they stop and they need to make a rishus hayachid. It's not something that would typically happen to a person who's going on his own or 2 people traveling together. It wouldn't normally happen to them. So it's dibra, lo dibru b'shayora elo b'hoive, it's just, that's a typical type of, a common type of scenario. Continues the Mishnah, Kol mechitza she'eino shel shesi v'shel erev, any mechitza which isn't both shesi and erev, which means a weaker type of mechitza, eino mechitza divi Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that any type of mechitza that's either shesi or erev is not considered a mechitza. Chachamim oimrim echod mishnei dvorim. Again, the Chachamim say that any one is enough. Either shesi or erev is always good enough and is always a good mechitza. Let's see this in the Gemara. Omar Rav Hamnuna Omar Rav. It was said in the name of Rav as follows. Hare Omru, we saw in Daf Tezvav Amud Beis, Oimeid meruba ala porotz, b'shesi, have a oimeid. We already saw that if you have more oimeid than porotz, then b'shesi, which means on horizontal, on vertical. We're talking there about the saddles. If you remember the Mishnah there, we had the shayora, shechonza bebiko v'kifua b'gemalim, and there we're talking about where you have only uprights. If you have only uprights, and we saw, make sure that you've either there's less than 3 tvachim between one and the next, or make sure that it's oimed meruba ala porotz. So as far as the uprights are concerned, we know that oimed meruba ala porotz is enough. So if you have a wall of 5 amos wide, of which 2 3/4 of the 5 amos is oimed with anything you want, and the rest of it, the 2 1/4 that are remaining, are are gaps, it's okay. What the Gemara is now asking now, Rav Huna boy Rav Hamnuna erev mai. What happens if you have a wall that's only made of horizontal? Can you say porutz meruba la'omed or not? Interesting question. Omar Abai. And let's remember, we've said this before, if the gaps are less than 3 tvachim, it's not called porutz. It's called an extension of the oimed. So in the case we mentioned in the Mishnah here with the strings, if you don't have 3 tvachim between one string and the next, it's not a discussion of porutz meruba la'omed. The whole thing is called oimed. It's completely considered solid. That's the chiddush of lovud. The question is, what happens if within a 10 tvachim height, you have just over 5 tvachim of oimed, but you have a minimum of porutz, and we're not a minimum of porutz vertically, a minimum of porutz horizontally. We're going to try and see what case you have. Where do you have such a scenario? Says the Gemara, Omar Abaya, Toshma, Shiur chavolim v'oivyon yeser al tefach. Sheyu akoil asara tvachim. We saw in our Mishnah, the only way that you can have a wall with horizontal strings that it's kosher, which means that you have a wall of 10 tvachim high and it's kosher, is only if the strings themselves comprise the tefach and a bit, which is missing. Because we had 3 gaps from the floor to the first string, from the first string to the second string, from the second string to the third string. Each gap is less than 3 tvachim. We need 10 tvachim. We're missing a tefach and a bit. That's how wide these strings have to be. Okay, that's what we saw in the Mishnah. Ve'im isa, if you say that horizontally, you can also say porutz that oimed meruba ala porutz is enough. Mostly full is enough. If so, lomoli yeser al tefach. Why do I need the strings to measure, to add up to a tefach and a bit? Levit pochis mishloisha v'chevel. Yeah, for off the ground, just under 3 tvachim, and you put a string mashahu, without any substantial thickness to the string. Upochis mishloisha, and then you have another 3 tvachim, just under 3 tvachim, v'chevel, and another string, also mashu, no substantial height. Upochis me'arba, and now leave a gap of just under 4 tvachim, v'chevel mashahu, and put a string there, you'll have your 10 tvachim. What's the problem? What are you going to say, that the 4 tvachim gap is not lovud? Okay, so it's not lovud. So what is it? Porutz. Okay, so it's porutz. You have 2 sets of lovud underneath it. So you have 6 tvachim of lovud, which means oimed. And you have 4 tvachim of porutz. So what? So it's oimed meruba ala porutz. So to just leave the top gap will be 4 tvachim, and it'll be kosher in the event that you say oimed meruba ala porutz works even horizontally. So we have proof from the fact the Mishnah didn't say that, and the Mishnah said we need each and every gap to be less than 3 tvachim, and the straps, the thickness of the strings themselves have to make up the last tefach and a bit. You see from there that we do not say oimed meruba ala porutz works on a horizontal wall, on a wall that's made of horizontal strings. Says the Gemara, V'tizbara. This is no, don't bring me proof from the Mishnah. Because how are you going to work this out? It's true that you brought proof from the Mishnah and you suggested that the top gap should be 4 tvachim. But let's see, can the top gap be 4 tvachim? And if the top gap cannot be 4 tvachim, can the middle gap be 4 tvachim? Let's see what's going on here. Where are you going to put these 4 tvachim? If you're going to put the 4 tvachim gap right at the bottom. So you have a gap of 4 tvachim, which is not lovud, it's a real gap. And then you have another 2 gaps on top of it, each of 3, just under 3 tvachim. So the top part, which has the lovud, is almost 6 tvachim. It's oimed, meruba, and the porutz is 4 tvachim underneath. So you're going to, it would seem that that's an idea. It says no, even without porutz meruba la oimed, let's say that without oimed meruba la porutz, let's say that you do say oimed meruba ala porutz on such a wall. We have another problem, that it's a wall that doesn't reach the ground. And the wall that doesn't reach the ground, if it's more than 3 tvachim off the ground, the kids can go underneath it. And that alone demolishes the status of wall. It's not considered a wall anymore. So it doesn't help if you say porutz meruba la oimid, oimid meruba la porutz. Tachlis is that it's a gap of 3 tvachim. Is even if you have a whole 10 tvachim wall and a gap of more than 3 tvachim underneath it, it's not going to be kosher. It's called a mechitza tluya. If you're going to put the 4 tefach gap right at the bottom, it's like a wall, a partition that the kids can go straight through, and therefore it's not a valid mechitza. Are you going to put it as we suggested before, that the top gap is going to be 4 tvachim? Then osi avira dahai gisa or dahai gisa or mevatle. We've already seen this before. It says if you don't have lavud, it's considered a gap. It's considered porotz. That means this string, the string itself, has a piritza above it till the sky, has a piritza underneath it 4 tvachim. If you have any solid where the airspace on both sides, on either side, is wider than the oimid, then the airspace on this side, together with the airspace on that side, totally disregards the oimid. So you've got the avira, the high gisa on one side, the high gisa, mevatele. So the top string is going to be disregarded, and then you're not going to have a wall of 10 tvachim. Maybe you should have a gap of less than 3 tvachim at the bottom. Now the gedi can't go through. It's less than 3 tvachim. And then a string. And then a gap of 4 tvachim. It's called porutz. And then a gap of 3 tvachim, which is called oimid. It's lovud. So now I've got the gap in the middle. So you haven't got avira dahai gisa and avira dahai gisa, because underneath it you don't have avira, you have a lovud. On top of it you don't have avira, you have lovud. So this, let's say that the 4 tvachim is going to be in the middle. Over here we have another case. Normally oimed meruba ala porotz means that any oimed has to be wider than the piritza, than the gap next to it. What happens, and we've discussed this before, if you have a case where the piritza is 6 tvachim, for example, and you have 4 tvachim oimed on either side, is that called oimed meruba ala porotz? The piritza is wider than either of the sides. If you add the 2 sides together, then the 2 oimdim together is meruba on the porotz is more than the gap. Do we say that? Can we add 2 oimdim together in order to become a meruba, to become a majority more than the porotz? That was a discussion. It's a machloikas. If you have 3 tvachim at the top, or just under 3 tvachim at the top, just under 3 tvachim at the bottom, and a gap of 4 tvachim in the middle, is that called oimid meruba ala porotz? It's only called oimid meruba ala porotz mishnei ruchos, if you add together the 2 sides. And v'chishamas minei oimid meruba ala porotz mishnei ruchos have oimid. Are you suggesting that indeed that's what we should be saying here? Yuravam, when you wanted to say oimid meruba ala porotz, or more accurately, when you wanted to bring proof from our Mishnah, Abaya wanted to bring proof from our Mishnah. What was Abaya suggesting? That you should have a gap of 4 tvachim, and the Mishnah doesn't say that, so you bring proof from the Mishnah that you don't say oimid meruba ala porotz by shesi, by erev, by horizontally. But what did Abaya suggest? If we would say oimid meruba ala porotz, what would it be? It would have to be like this. The 4 tvachim gap is in the middle. So that means you're suggesting that you use a concept of oimid meruba ala porotz mishtei ruchos. Is that what you're suggesting? We don't rule that way. The loch is oimid meruba ala porotz mishtei ruchos is not called oimid meruba. So you Abaya, what's your proof from the Mishnah? How could you have used these 3 strings any other way than the Mishnah used it? Even if you were to say that theoretically oimid meruba ala porotz would work by erev, by horizontal strings, but you don't have such a case. Where are you going to put the 4 tvachim if you're talking about strings? It can't work, so you can't bring me proof from the Mishnah. The Mishnah was talking about strings. The only way with strings that you can have 10 tvachim is like it says in the Mishnah. And even if you were to use oimid meruba ala porotz, it wouldn't help you. You have no such case. Elo Rav Hamnuna hacha komi boile. Rav Hamnuna was not asking about strings. With strings, you're right. there's no way of using oimed merubah ala porot. We have to make the whole wall oimed. We have to use the full 10 tvachim of either the oimed of the straps themselves or the oimed of the lovud. But what was Rav Nuna's question? We're talking about oimed merubah. His question was oimed merubah ala porot by erev, horizontally, but not with strings. What happens if you had a mat? The mat itself was just over 7 tvachim, let's call it wide. Or just in order we should understand what we're talking about, let's call it 7 and a bit tvachim high. If you're holding the mat in front of you, so to speak, comprising a part of a wall, so you have a 7 tvachim high mat facing you. And what did he do? V'chokak po gimel. He left a frame all the way round, and just above the frame that he's left at the bottom of this mat, he's cut away 3 tvachim height of the whole width of this machzeles, of this mat. The whole width going from right to left. You have 4 tvachim mat. We said this mat was 7 and a bit tvachim high. The first 4 tvachim of the mat he left whole. It's solid, it's oimed, nothing to do with lovud. It's oimed on its own right, it's 4 tvachim. Then he made a gap, he cut away a whole chokak bo gimel. He cut away 3 tvachim, which means that the gap between the top of what he cut away and the bottom of what he cut away is actually going to be called a pirza, because it's 3 tvachim, there's no lovud there. So you have a oimed of 4 tvachim, then you have a pirza of 3 tvachim, and then you have a little bit of mat that he left at the bottom, a mashu of the mat that he left, that's, so to speak, considered like a chevel, like a string. The shavak bo dalad umashu. So what's left of the mat is 4 tvachim at the top and the mashu underneath these 3 tvachim. V'oikmu, and where did he position this mat? Bepochis migimel. He positioned this mat just under 3 tvachim off the ground. So you have lovud from the ground until the bottom of this machzeles. That's considered oimed. 3 tvachim, less than 3 tvachim is lovud. And then you have a gap of 3 tvachim, that's called porotz. And then you have a 4 tvachim oimed, the solid part of the mat, that's oimed. So how much oimed have you got? Just under 3 tvachim at the bottom, 4 tvachim at the top, that's about 7 tvachim, 3 tvachim porotz in the middle. Do you say oimed merubah ala porotz or not? That was Rav Nuna's question. That's one way of understanding Rav Nuna's question. Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Ashi says no. Rav Nuna was asking a different question. Mechitza tluya iboile. When he was saying, do you say oimed merubah ala porotz, was talking about when you have a suspended wall. Kadaboye minei Rabbi Tavla mirav. Similar to what Rabbi Tavla asked Rav, Mechitza tluya mahu shetatir b'churva. He asked Rav, is a suspended wall in a churva, if you have a ruins, a broken building, and parts of the top of the walls are still there, but the walls are hanging down, but they're not actually reaching the ground. So it's a mechitza that's hanging up, it's suspended. Can the area inside these mechitzas be considered a reshus hayochid or not? Omalei, Rav answered to Rabbi Tavla, ein mechitza tluya materes, that a suspended wall is never matir as a reshus hayochid, elo b'mayim, only unless it's suspended over water, and there kalhu shekilu chachomim b'mayim. The chachomim had a leniency in order people should be able to draw water to have what to drink from. They had a certain leniency there, but otherwise a mechitza tluya is not considered a good mechitza. So that suspended mechitza, that's what Rav Nuna was asking when he was wondering whether horizontally you say oimed merubah ala porotz. That was his question. When you have a wall suspended and a gap underneath it, is it a good mechitza? A typical mechitza tluya, the mechitza itself would be 10 tvachim high. Tluya means it's suspended, it means it's more than 3 tvachim off the ground. So relative to the entire height, you've got an oimed merubah ala porotz. You've got more wall than gap underneath it, and that was Rav Nuna's question. Continues the Gemara. Makifin bekonim v'chulu. We saw in the Mishnah that the Mishnah said that you can, if you have upright reeds, you can have lots and lots of these reeds encircling an area, and it will become a reshus hayochid, providing that you have providing you do not have 3 tvachim between one reed and the next, and then you have lavud. And then the Mishnah continued, B'shayora dibru, that these leniencies, these types of walls that are either just oriv or just shesi, just upright, so just horizontal, they are only talking about a shayora, divrei Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw. Says the Gemara, B'shayora, and this is now quoting Rabbi Yehuda, B'shayora in b'yochid loy. Rabbi Yehuda holds that when you're allowed to use a wall which is either shesi or erev, only if there's a rabbim, if there's 3 people or more who need to use it. But if an individual or 2 individuals need to use it, loy, then according to Rabbi Yehuda, we would not rely on such a wall. V'otanya, this seems to contradict the Brisa. The Brisa says, Rabbi Yehuda oimer kol mechitzos Shabbos. Any mechitzos in Hilchos Shabbos, lo yitiru lo yochid yoisa mibeis osayim. That for a yochid, an individual, we don't ever allow a person to carry more than a beis osayim, an area that you can plant 2 saw of produce in it, which is 100 amos by 50 amos. That area is as much as we allow a single individual to carry within mechitzos. Not more than that. But you see that up to beis osayim, kol mechitzos Shabbos, any mechitzos you're allowed to carry. And this is Rabbi Yehuda. And in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda seems to say that a yochid cannot rely on these mechitzos at all, even up to beis osayim. Answers the Gemara, Kada Omer of Nachman v'Tamer of Bivi bar Abaya. We'll soon see where of Nachman or of Bivi bar Abaya said this, but they said, Lo nitzracha elo litoin lehem kol tzorkon. When it says in the Mishnah, B'shayora yes, a yochid not, that means to give them as much as they want. But a limited use of up to beis osayim, that we do give him. Hachanami litin lehem kol tzorkon. In order to give them as much as they want to use, that only for a shayora, not for a private person. But a private person can use such a mechitza up to beis osayim. Where's the source of this difference? Where do we find that they said this, that there's difference between an individual who only can use up to beis osayim, but a rabbim who can use more? Yeah, none. They said this on a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kol mechitza she'eino shel shesi ve'erev. Any mechitza which is not both shesi and erev, a solid wall, eino mechitza, is not considered a mechitza in Hilchos Shabbos. Divya Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. We saw that in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda, who happens to be the son of that Rabbi Yehuda, we'll soon see what difference that makes. But according to Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda, you need a shesi and erev. If you have any one of them, it's not called a mechitza. That's what it says in the Mishnah. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. This seems to contradict an explicit brayse or tanya we learned, echod yochid ve'echod shayora, irrespective of whether it's a private person or a caravan, a group of 3 people or more, lechavolim, that they can use strings which is only erev in order to make a mechitza. So you see clearly that you can use a mechitza of just erev, just horizontal, even for a private person. Uma bein yochid l'shayora. What difference is there between the strings that a single person can use or a shayora? Yochid noisnin lebeis osayim. A single person can only carry up to beis osayim. Shnayim, if it's 2 people, it's also considered like an individual. Noisnim lehem beis osayim. Between them, they have a beis osayim. Gimel, if there's 3, nasu shayora, they are considered a shayora. It's already a rabbim. Noisnim lehem beis shesh. Divir beis Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda says that if there's a shayora, they can have up to 6 saw. That means 3 times beis osayim. That's Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachomim argue and say, Echod Yochid, Echod Shayora, Noisim Len Kol Tzorkom. The Chachomim say, it doesn't matter if the wall is just Shesi, just Erev, it doesn't matter if it's a Yochid, if it's a Rabbim, you can use it Kol Tzorkon. Ubilvad Shelo Yehei Beis Osayim Ponu. However, the Chachomim learn, if you have 2, the shir of Beis Osayim, which is what typically a single person would use, or would use for himself. if you have a beis osayim more than you need, at that point, even the Chachomim agree you cannot carry that. Omer of Nachman v'itemer of Bibi Barabaya lo nitzrecha elo litenem kol tzorkon. Because we ask a contradiction. We just saw in the Brisa here, according to Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, he says explicitly that for a yochid you can have beis osayim, for a shayora you can have 6 sa, which is 3 times a beis osayim. That's all very good. How are you explaining our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says explicitly, Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda said that if it's either shesi or erev, kol mechitza she'eino shel shesi v'shel erev, if it's not both shesi and erev, eino mechitza, it's not called a mechitza. And here you have a brisa where Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda said explicitly it is called a mechitza. This is where Rav Nachman says, I'll tell you the difference. The Mishnah is talking about giving you as much as you want. No. For there, Rabbi Yossi says that if it's a wall which is only shesi, only erev, you cannot have as much as you want. How much can you have? As much as you need. The minimum that you need. How much do you need? For that he said in the Brisa, that 1 person, beis osayim, 2 people, beis osayim, 3 people, 6 sa, etc. So we see that when we explained Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rav Nachman was forced to say that there's a difference between the Mishnah that's talking about being able to use it as much as you want and the Brisa that's talking about the minimum use. If so, we're going to say the same with Rabbi Yehuda. Even though Rabbi Yehuda said in our Mishnah that b'shayara dibru, that you can only a shayara can use such a wall, and the Brisa that we asked a question on Rabbi Yehuda that says kol mechitza is Shabbos, a yochid can use it up to beis osayim. Yeah, because again, the Mishnah is talking about being able to use it as much as you want. That's only a shayara. To use it a minimum that you need, that's up to beis osayim, and that's the Brisa. And in the next shir, we're going to continue from here.